In Iran, they are celebrating a victory over the United States. Iran announced that it closed the Strait of Hormuz because of the American blockade on its ports. And meanwhile, the American military is reinforcing its forces in the Middle East and stepping up Operation Economic Fury. The United States is planning to take control of ships linked to Iran all around the world. After Donald Trump declared yesterday that Iran had agreed to give up the nuclear program, the Revolutionary Guards in Tehran announced they will never hand over the uranium to the United States. Iran's president said that Trump has no justification for preventing the Iranians from having nuclear weapons. In Pakistan, they declared that Iran had announced that it would not give up its great threat against Israel. So while Iran clings to its gains in tough negotiations, the IDF is preparing for the collapse of the ceasefire. I'm Yair Pinto. With me is Mati Shoshani. And we are boots on the ground. We bring you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel. And also, the whole truth about what's happening in our neighborhood, the Middle East. And this is the opening of day 51 of the war, Roaring Lion, or by its American name, Epic Fury. And they launched another operation that is called Economic Fury, which is going up a level, because the United States is planning to take control of ships linked to Iran all around the world. The move expands the naval blockade beyond the Middle East and is aimed at hurting Tehran's oil export routes, especially to the Chinese market. In the shadow of tension in the Strait of Hormuz and the lack of a breakthrough in the negotiations, Washington is increasing the economic pressure in an attempt to force concessions on the nuclear program. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian said that Trump has no justification for denying Iran its rights to nuclear weapons. This happened in television interviews in which Iran's president tried to downplay the severe friction at the top of the Revolutionary Guards leadership, claiming that Iran is not interested in wars and is working to advance peace. He presented the launches towards the civilian population centers as self-defense. He criticized the United States of trying to deny them the nuclear capability. And right now, it seems that Iran is conducting very tough negotiations, the kind that only they know how to conduct. The Iranians understand that despite their difficult military condition, they will fully exploit the potential of the achievements that they managed to preserve. The first of these is the fact that the regime survived and still is standing. The second is that the assets that they still have are the Strait of Hormuz, which during the war the Iranians took a kind of ownership of. And the third is the ability to launch missiles and drones towards its neighbors, the Arab Gulf. And the additional thing is the preservation of the proxy network, especially its grip through Hezbollah in Lebanon. It's important to note that the coordination between the IDF and the United States military is around the possibility that the ceasefire with Iran could collapse at any moment altogether. And that points to this is that published by Donald Trump, the post that he published. The United States president praised Israel on his Truth social media network, saying that whatever people think about Israel, if they like it or not, they have proven themselves to be a great ally of the United States. Trump went on to write that they are brave, bold, loyal, and smart, and unlike others whose true colors are exposed in a moment of conflict and pressure, Israel fights hard and knows how to win. The IDF updated today that in the war against the Hezbollah terrorist organization, the commander of Binchbel in Lebanon was terminated before the ceasefire. The IDF spokesperson updated that since the outbreak of Operation Roaring Lion, more than 1,800 Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon have been eliminated, more than 150 of them in the day before the ceasefire. And it was also stated that in that same day, about 300 military infrastructures were attacked, including launchers, headquarters, and weapons warehouses in several areas in Lebanon. The IDF also announced the elimination of Hezbollah's Binchbel sector commander, Ali Ras Abbas, who was eliminated alongside other commanders. And why is Kamala Harris spreading conspiracy theories and hate? Former United States Vice President Kamala Harris, who lost the last presidential elections to Donald Trump, accused Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel of being the one who dragged the American president into military action against Iran. Harris sharply criticized Trump, declaring that he entered a war that the American people did not want. Let's be clear about this. He was dragged into by Bibi Netanyahu. This is a quote from Kamala Harris. And in addition, she called the president an insecure man and claimed that the attack in Iran was his pathetic attempt to distract attention from the Epstein documents. I just want to tell her that I'm praying for her and that we should thank God she is not the president of the United States right now, because everything she said is completely not correct. The Ayatollah regime in Iran has threatened multiple times to destroy Israel. They chanted death to America, death to the United States. The United States are the big Satan, Israel is the small Satan. And they developed nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles that can reach the United States of America. So if that's not an American interest, I don't know what is. I'm Yair Pinto. With me is Mati Shoshani, and we are boots on the ground. We bring you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel. And this is day 51 of the war against the Revolutionary Guards in Iran, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. And just before we begin, I want to call on you to keep spreading the truth. Share our content with as many people as possible. Click on the subscribe button. Most importantly, don't forget to look for me, Yair Pinto, and for Mati Shoshani on our social media platforms to get the behind-the-scenes perspective of what it's like to live in Israel under this war. Our senior Middle East correspondent, Mati Shoshani, when on the one hand, Iran is celebrating victory and claiming that it will never give up its uranium, but on the other hand, it continues to conduct negotiations under heavy American pressure, how should we understand the Iranian strategy right now? Is this a real stand on principles or an attempt to buy time from a position of weakness?
Yeah, that's really a great and complicated question. We're not entirely sure what the Iranians want, and I'll try to explain why it's so complicated to get a clear reading of what they're really going for. I'll start from the end. The Iranian regime wants to survive, but there's a couple unknowns in that statement alone. One, who is the Iranian regime right now? And two, what does survival actually look like? What kind of additional wins can they gain as we're in this phase of the negotiation? Now, I'll give you a couple examples. They, for instance, last week in the negotiations that took place in Islamabad, the capital of Pakistan, they came in guns blazing, literally and figuratively speaking, and stated that the nuclear or enriched uranium was off the table, as in they had an inherent right for enriched uranium. The US said, no dice, we're not going to go forward with that. The next day, when Trump imposed the blockade on Iran, suddenly Iran was willing to state, and they stated this publicly, that there's great progress with the topic of enriched uranium. We're very close to understanding, we're very close to agreements with the United States. What really is their agenda? It's twofold. The first one is that the Iranians understand now more than ever that a enriched uranium program and a nuclear, let's call it nuclear program, is something that they will have a very hard time living without. That is not an exaggeration. They're looking at this war and they're saying, if only, and we've heard these messages come out of Iran, if only we had enriched uranium, and if only we had at least one nuclear bomb, our fate would be very different. These negotiations would be very different. How do you place that kind of thought process into a negotiation? That's not an easy thing to do, because on the one hand, the United States is clear. We will continue the ground and pound campaign. We will continue to bomb. We will continue to eliminate. We will continue with the maximum financial pressure until the moment, this is important, that you have no nuclear program, definitely not for military purposes. But the Iranians need that because internally, that's one of their victory cards as far as the political echelon maintaining power, maintaining influence in Iran goes. So what are they doing here? They're doing both the same things, Yael. On the one hand, they're doing everything they can to survive. They're wiggling, they're negotiating, they're pressing, and they're stressing, and they're doing anything you can do in a negotiation to maintain power. And they're willing to give up quite a lot. And I expect we're going to see that in the coming days to maintain that power and that control. At the same time, they have a true problem internally within Iran, in which it's not entirely clear if the parties at be or the powers at be in Iran, be it the spokesperson of the parliament, Galibaf, or someone else, the foreign minister, whether or not what they say, let's say they give concessions on the nuclear program, or they give concessions on the Strait of Hormuz opening up, they're not entirely sure that when they do that, then when they say that, they can actually follow through with action. Why is that? Because there's rivalry taking place inside the political leadership in Iran, and they're not necessarily speaking on behalf of everyone else. More so than that, there isn't necessarily a single leadership element. So, are we hearing confusing messaging coming out of Iran? Absolutely. Does that messaging indicate that there is actual confusion within Iran? Yes, it does, but it doesn't mean they're not trying to maximize their effect and their ability in the negotiations. So, what does that mean practically speaking? What can we expect to see in the days to come? The usual from the Iranians: maximum pressure on their behalf, maximum damage to ships trying to travel through the Strait of Hormuz, maximum deception, and let's call it public perception campaigns throughout international media. And at the same time, slowly but surely, coming towards what the United States is requesting in the negotiations, and slowly but surely giving in to what they will be requested to do.
And Mati, to what extent does the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and the American threat to take control of ships linked to Iran around the world in international waters signal a new stage in the campaign, not only between Washington and Tehran, but in the struggle over the regional order and the global economy?
That's a great question. Let's talk about what closing the Strait of Hormuz on behalf of the US actually means to the world and to the Iranians. There are a couple important things to really understand here that are the foundational facts of what's actually happening on the ground in Iran. Let's start with the Iranians themselves. First of all, Iran is losing money by the day by there being a naval blockade on them by the United States. How much money are they losing? Somewhere between $350 and $550 million per day, only from the export of crude oil. You heard me right. Up to $500 million per day that the Iranian regime is losing. Multiply that by a month, we're now talking 10, 12, 15 billion dollars of lost revenue. That's not including any other derivative of the petrochemical industry that they used to export, be it plastics, be it whatever solids that they're exporting. That's all gone. They're not making money. Now, here's another important fact. The US is not losing money. People might have this weird idea that the fact that the Strait of Hormuz is closed affects global markets and therefore the US is under financial pressure. Let me tell you something. It's the exact opposite. The United States is actually making money by the Strait of Hormuz being closed, and they're making it not once, but actually twice. Let me explain. The US does two things. One, it exports crude oil. Now, I don't want to get too technical. There are different types of crude oil around the world. You hear this sometimes in the names of the barrels, the Brent Sea barrel, and etc. Anyway, there are different kinds of crude oil. There's clean crude oil, there's dirty crude oil. The US has one type of it, the cleaner type of crude oil. They export that to countries around the world that then refine that and extract what we extract from crude oil, gasoline, diesel, the different fuels that are used for the different industries, and of course, all the derivatives from the petrochemical industry. But it continues beyond that. The US also has the ability to refine fuels. So they're taking in crude oil from other countries, refining it, and now selling it at a premium because there's a global shortage. So instead of losing money, the US is actually doubling down on its revenue. So when you look at the interest over here, Iran has a huge interest to open up the straits and move ships. The US, when it comes to cash flow and revenue, the exact opposite from them. That's important to remember. There's another big player over here. There's one more substantial group of players that are involved in what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz, and those are, of course, the Gulf states. And here it's a more complex situation that needs to be analyzed a little more in depth. You have a bunch of players there who are friends or semi-friends of the United States, the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Qataris, the Kuwaitis, the Omanis, etc. They're all there on the Gulf. They want to export their oil. They can't do that because, of course, of the Iranian threat on the Strait of Hormuz. And of course, the Iranians can't move their crude oil through the Strait of Hormuz because of that pressure too. Those countries, part of them are able to move their oil. The Saudis can move about half of their daily output of oil through a pipeline through the Red Sea, which is another issue that we're not going to touch on right now. But those countries too want the Strait of Hormuz to be open. So what's happening here? The US is putting pressure on the Iranians. The Iranians are losing a lot of money a day. I think about this from an Israeli perspective. If we as a government were making $15 billion a month on the export of oil with, let's say, an 80% profit margin on that, where it's probably actually higher than that, that's a lot of money. That changes the economy of a country. And for a country like Iran that relies on that cash to pay for their terrorism exports and exploits, again, that's a lot of money. So there's a lot of pressure on the Iranian regime, much less pressure on the US. And this needs to be understood. The US is not bleeding financially from this. Their cost is related to the military operation. They're not losing any substantial money over the fact that oil isn't moving through the Strait of Hormuz. And let's talk about the big player that isn't actually present in this conversation: China. China is the biggest loser from what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz. Let me explain. Up till this moment, Chinese markets were buying oil from the Iranians at a substantial discount that was being sent by the Iranian, what we call the shadow fleet, from Iran, of course, from Khalg Island in the northern part of the Arabian, or let's call it Persian Gulf, down through the Strait of Hormuz, and of course to Asian markets. That doesn't exist anymore. If China wants oil now, they need to go to, drum roll, Yair, they need to go to the United States. They need to look to the US and the US allies to buy oil at a higher price and also strengthening the relationship with the US. Where do we see this relationship come to play? In Trump's statements over this last weekend and in the days preceding that, Trump several times said, I'll simplify the conversation, China is our friend. China too has an interest for the Iranians to open up, this is important, to open up the Strait of Hormuz. Iran, stop being so problematic and open up the Strait of Hormuz so the Chinese can once again have oil. And he did this really brilliant move from a PR perspective of pivoting everyone's attention to what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz and blaming the Iranians for it. So there's a clock that's ticking. That clock hurts the Iranians. They lose money every day. There's a shortage of oil, and they're losing and weakening their grasp over that part of the economic world. The United States, at the same time, is able to bleed the economy of the Iranians, put maximum pressure on them and on their allies, all the whilst not actually losing any money. And when you think about the fact that in a couple days, we have the end of the ceasefire, that positions the United States in a very strong posture to put the squeeze on the Iranians and also to bring in the Chinese and the Gulf states as other countries that are tailwind pushing the US team, saying, yes, Iran, give up. Yes, Iran, open up the straits. Yes, Iran, stop with your mischievous behavior. I'm, of course, being cynical. It's much worse than that. And pushing on behalf of the United States. So we're in a position here that is a win-win for the United States. And honestly, it's a shame it hasn't been done before. One last thought on the financial implications of this entire thing. The thought is that the Iranians have oil that's en route to their clients. And the US has the ability, they have an enormous fleet and a lot of intelligence, an ability to seize that oil en route to their clients. So oil that's en route to China, to India, to other countries around the world, the US can seize those ships before they make it to those markets and say, actually, you need to pay for the damages from this war. No oil. Why are they not doing that? One, they're leaving that card sort of waiting and pending on what the Iranians will do. And two, which is substantial, it will further affect the global oil markets, and they're hesitant to do that.
And Mati, when the IDF is already preparing for the possibility that the ceasefire could collapse at any moment, and at the same time, Iran is trying to preserve its strategic assets, Hormuz, launch capabilities, and its grip through Hezbollah, the terrorist organization in Lebanon, what does this mean for real chances of an agreement? And are we actually getting closer to another round of fighting?
Simply stated, I don't think we're going to another round of violence. I think there's several weeks, at least a week, before there is any kind of violence, and I think it's more likely that we will have an agreement. Let me explain. It is Sunday. On Tuesday, the ceasefire between the United States and Iran expires. At the same time, there's the ongoing campaign of pressure against the Iranian economy. That's their ships. That's, of course, the blockade on the ports in Iran. And at the same time, there's also a campaign of pressure that's related to the Israeli-Lebanese agreement related to Hezbollah in Lebanon. All of this puts a lot of pressure on the Iranian regime. And I want to say this clearly, they really don't have any tricks up their sleeve that can substantially change the situation. As in, they're not able to reverse the blockade. They're not able to feed substantial weaponry or cash to the Hezbollah proxies in Lebanon. So those are two big levers of power that they would have that are removed from the table. But it goes on. The US has all the power right now in this conversation. They're able to harm the Iranian regime by cutting off their cash supply, which they're doing. They're able to do another thing to close the Strait of Hormuz, preventing them from moving in and out goods from the country, which they're also doing. And Israel continues to pressure Hezbollah. So where exactly do the Iranians and their Hezbollah proxies have any substantial power or ability to affect the situation in a quick way? The answer is they don't. They could launch ballistic missiles, but that's just more of the same. They could call on the Houthis to take action, but again, we're prepared for that option, and it is a limited scope ability right now. And Hezbollah, which is their biggest sort of ace, is also relatively weakened at the moment. So there isn't much that the Iranians can do. And because of that, I don't see them going back to warfare because it'll only further weaken them. It makes much more sense for them, especially when you see their track record, to play the long game, to try to prolong the negotiations, to try and extend the ceasefire, to pretend that there was a misunderstanding, they're actually cooperating with the US, and to do that time and time again until the point, which is coming soon, where there's no more left to go, and they have to give in to the Americans and have to sign some kind of agreement. And we've been here before. They're the masters of the negotiation. They're the masters of drawing things out, and they will try to do that till the very last moment. So my projection is, my estimation is, barring something very surprising happens, we're going to see continued negotiation, not a return to warfare.
Thank you very much, Mati. This really helped me better understand what we are dealing with. And to all of you that are joining us, make sure that you keep spreading the truth. This is a war on information, on untruth. That's how the enemy of God is working. First attacking the truth, so you don't know what's right and what's wrong, and then launching the physical strikes. Let me tell you that just last week, we visited Meir Panim's branch in Dimona, an Israeli city, that was hit by a direct Iranian missile. A direct missile struck in that area, and the building suffered severe structural damage and is now completely unsafe to use. What was once a place of warmth, dignity, and daily meals for Israelis that cannot provide for themselves is now filled with broken glass, debris, and instability. More than 470 residents were displaced in this attack to the Israeli city of Dimona, and thousands of homes were attacked and affected, windows broken, and doors and roofs shattered. And right in the middle of it, Meir Panim, a lifeline for so many, was deeply impacted because inside the building, ceilings are at risk of collapse. Electricity and plumbing systems have been destroyed. Entire sections of the facility need to be rebuilt from the ground up. And yet, Meir Panim still continues with its mission to feed those that have nothing in Israel. The poverty line Israelis with daily meals that haven't stopped even though the building is destroyed. Even without a building, even in crisis, the team continues to provide food every single day to those who depend on it. But emergency operations are not enough because we need to rebuild, not just to restore what was lost, but to bring this place back to life. A fully functioning, dignified space where people can once again receive meals with respect, consistency, and care. Government support may cover part of the damage, but it will not restore the heart of this place. That depends on us. And if you want to stand with the people of Dimona, if you want to help rebuild this place of hope, we invite you to give today. You can go to visit at bless-israel.org. Again, that's bless-israel.org, and make a donation to help Meir Panim rebuild and provide more meals, more food to Holocaust survivors, to children in families underneath the poverty line in Israel. That's really standing with the Jewish people of Israel in this hard time. Make a donation at bless-israel.org. Now let's continue with the news because gunfire was heard again in the Strait of Hormuz. Two merchant vessels that relied on a narrow passage window reported coming under live fire as they tried to cross that route. And a short time later, the Revolutionary Guards announced that the strait had returned to the tight control of the Iranian forces, while the Americans were already talking not only about a naval blockade, but about seizing vessels linked to Iran that are even beyond the Middle East in international waters. So why is Iran tightening its grip on Hormuz right now? And what happens if Washington decides that the next phase is no longer economic but militarily? This is the moment when Day 51 of the Roaring Lion War, or by its American name, Epic Fury, stops looking like a tense ceasefire and starts looking like a race against time. On one side, Tehran is trying to hold on by force to whatever it has left: control over Hormuz, launch capabilities, nuclear bargaining chips, and leverage through Hezbollah. On the other side, the United States is tightening the pressure, not only with military presence, but with what increasingly looks like a real war on the regime's money pipeline. And in Jerusalem, they are not waiting for an official explanation. Israel is already preparing for the possibility that everything could collapse all at once. And we have to begin with Hormuz, because that's where the story is most alive right now. Iran did not only threaten, it actually acted. It shut down free passages again, warned that any ship approaching without authorization could be destroyed. And on the ground, there were already reports of hits or gunfire directed at commercial vessels. And at the same time, United States Central Command announced that 23 ships had obeyed instructions and turned back since the naval blockade began. This is no longer a theoretical deadline or just a headline. This is enforcement in real time. Ships are turning around, tankers are waiting, shipping companies are holding their breath. And the energy market, it is once again learning that in the Middle East, sometimes two fast boats and one order are enough to shake the entire world. And here, it's important to understand that the Iranian method, outwardly, Iran is still trying to project a double message. On the one hand, it says that it wants the Strait of Hormuz to remain open. On the other hand, it declares that passage will remain under Iranian military control as long as the United States does not remove the blockade on Iranian ports. This is the point. Iran is not asking for free movement. It's demanding movement under its own supervision. In other words, not freedom of navigation, but navigation at a strategic price. Passage is not managed by normal trade rules, but by the rules of crisis, threat, and deterrence. And beyond that stands the force that the Americans did not manage to erase completely. Trump kept saying that the Iranian Navy was almost totally destroyed, but that is mainly true of regular Navy vessels. The force that continues to trouble the Americans and international shipping lanes is the naval arm of the Revolutionary Guards. And I'm talking about small, fast boats, sometimes armed with missiles and sometimes with drones operating with hit and run tactics. Not large warships, not a classic naval battle, guerrilla warfare at sea. This force operates from about 10 fortified bases, some of them hidden in caves along with the coast, with a presence on roughly 38 islands in the Gulf and with a manpower base of around 50,000 troops. The United States struck some of those boats, but even according to the American acknowledgments, only about half of them were sunk. That means that the threat was not broken. It simply became more elusive. And that also brings us and explains why the Americans are so careful, because their main fear is not an orderly battle, but a swarm of fast boats, a scenario in which dozens of small craft launches are carried out at once. Attacks from several directions, and they can also disappear into the coast or into hidden shelters. This is the threat. This is why the American naval blockade is being enforced mainly east of Hormuz, from the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea, and not too deep inside the zone where Iran has the tactical advantage. That's an operational choice. Apply pressure, but do not talk into the maritime trap that Iran has spent years building. So, Hormuz is not just a friction point, it's leverage. And in Tehran, they understand that very well. As long as they hold that valve in their hand, they can influence oil prices, political decisions, pressure from China, nerves in Europe, and the pace at which the United States chooses to escalate. So, it's no surprise that the threats around Hormuz are arriving exactly when the talks are stuck. And that brings us to the negotiations. Muhammad Bagher Ghalibaf, the spokesperson of the Iranian parliament, says that there has been progress, but also large gaps. He admits that there were conclusions on some issues, but stresses that on others, Iran is still not prepared to compromise. And at the same time, the mediators are projecting a far less rosy picture. There is not even a sign of optimism around the issue of enriched uranium. Tehran continues to dig in. Washington continues to demand. Pakistan is still in the picture as a mediator, and there is also talk about the possibility that enriched uranium could be transferred there. But for now, that still looks like an idea on the table and not a real agreement. Even if for a moment it seems that Donald Trump was sure that there was a deal coming, Tehran quickly rejected that. Iran denies that it agreed to give up the uranium. It denied that it is on the way to surrender. And it continues saying that the American demands are excessive. More than that, in Pakistan, it was already said that Iran is not prepared to give up its missile program either, meaning that one of the main pillars of the threat to Israel is still alive. This is no longer only a nuclear file, it is an entire package: uranium, missiles, proxies, Hormuz, and the whole regional arena. And inside that pressure, the United States is moving up a new level. Not just another destroyer, not just another threat, but a move that looks like a genuine economic fury. Because in Washington, they are planning to seize ships that are linked to Iran around the world, not only in the Gulf, also on more distant routes where Iranian oil is flowing to Asian markets and especially to China. The meaning is clear: expand the blockade from the nearby sea to the entire export chain. Do not strike only at the crossing points, strike the revenue. And here, we need to pause over one very important detail. A significant part of the Iranian oil exports does not move in normal ships with transparent identities. It moves through a shadow fleet of tankers. Ships that change flags, shut off identification systems, operate without proper insurance, and push Iranian oil into Asian markets. And according to estimates, about 1.6 million barrels per day are still flowing through these routes, mainly to China and to small independent refineries. From Washington's perspective, hitting that route means hitting the heart of the regime's income mechanism. No longer just a sanction on paper, but a physical strike on the ability to transport, sell, and get paid. That's why the next stage being discussed in the United States is a combination of military, financial, and legal pressure. The United States Treasury is adding ships and also companies to sanctions lists. The Justice Department is preparing prosecutions against actors involved in buying and selling Iranian oil. And the military, according to the reports, is preparing to board tankers and seize commercial vessels in international waters. If that happens, the rules of the game will truly change, not only in Hormuz, but across the global energy markets. Because the Americans also know that this is not a free risk move. Because once you hit Iran's oil roads, their revenue streams, Tehran has several ways to respond. The first is, of course, to intensify the crisis in Hormuz even further. The second is to threaten oil infrastructure in the Gulf. And the third is to widen the threat to another route, Bab el-Mandeb. This is an additional Iranian card that is coming up more and more. The strait connecting the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden and also the Indian Ocean is under attack. But the Americans also know that this is not a risk-free move, because once you hit Iran's oil routes, Tehran has several ways to respond. The first is, of course, to intensify the crisis in Hormuz even further. The second is to threaten oil infrastructure in the Gulf. And the third is to widen the threat to another route, Bab el-Mandab. This is the additional Iranian card that's coming up more and more, the strait connecting the Red Sea to the Gulf of Eden and the Indian Ocean. If Hormuz is one valve, the Bab el-Mandeb is the second. Why disruption there lengthens the routes by 10 to 15 days. It raises the shipping costs, harms the trade between Asia and Europe, pressures the energy prices, and also hits Israel through the Red Sea and the port of Eilat in the south. Right now, it is still more of a looming threat than an active move, but the fact that it is now part of the conversation already raises the level of this risk. And while all of this is happening, one more alarming detail needs attention. Iran is not empty. On the contrary, according to the updated estimates, the American intelligence stated that Iran still has more than 60% of its missile launchers and about 40% of its drone arsenal. And in the days after the ceasefire, Iran managed to recover about 100 systems that had been hidden in caves and in bunkers, and to restore this launcher force to a higher level than it had at the beginning of this pause. It's now digging under the rubble, in bunkers that were destroyed, and also in storage sites that were hit, trying to pull out missiles that are buried there. Some American estimates say that once this process is completed, Iran could recover as much as 70% of the missile stockpile that it had before this war. That's a critical detail because it changes the whole feeling of time. Very often during a ceasefire, there is an assumption that the side that was hit first remains the same side and stays weakened. But in Iran's case, time may work the opposite direction as well. The more days pass without a decision, the more Tehran is trying to rebuild, recover, restore, and reorganize what was damaged. That's why in Jerusalem and in Washington, they're not looking at this pause as an ending. We are looking at it as a window. The question is, who is still working for? Who is this window supporting? And from here, we move to Israel. Because here in Israel, there is intense readiness for the possibility of renewed fighting. There is no change for now in the home front command instructions, and the education system is functioning fully, but the defense establishment is not counting on a long calm. The target bank has been updated. The Air Force is on alert. Coordination with the Americans is close. And if the ceasefire collapses, the targets on the table this time could also include Iranian energy assets. This is no longer only about disrupting one launcher or one warehouse. It is about going deeper into the engines that keep the regime and its war machine alive. Against that background, it also stands out that Donald Trump chose this moment to send a very clear message to Israel. He wrote that Israel is a great ally, brave, bold, loyal, and smart, and that unlike others, it fights hard and knows how to win. This matters now because it is not just a praise, but because of the timing. The American president is projecting full support for Israel precisely while also trying to leave the door open for an agreement and also at the same time threatening that if there is no deal, the bombing will resume. In other words, he's trying to hold two lines at once, prepare for escalation and preserve a diplomatic opening. In the meantime, we need your help. We need your help in sharing the truth. You can keep spreading everything that we're doing here in Israel with anybody who wants to know what's happening in this region. And above all, you can hit the subscribe button on TBN Israel so you never miss another update of Boots on the Ground. Today's story does not end with Iran, because while Hormuz is burning and the talks are stuck, Lebanon is also reminding everybody that the ceasefire on paper is not the end of a combat on the ground. Because this morning, it was cleared for publication that Sergeant First Class in the reserves, Lidor Porat, 31 years of age from Ashdod, in Israel, a fighter in the Battalion 7106 of Regional Brigade 769, was killed in southern Lebanon after an IDF engineering vehicle ran over a Hezbollah explosive device. Alongside him, 9 additional soldiers were wounded, 1 seriously, 4 moderately, and 4 lightly. The soldiers were evacuated by helicopter, and the families were informed. Immediately after the explosion, targets in the area were attacked. This was not just an isolated event. Only a short time earlier, the death of Master Sergeant in Reserves Barak Alfon, 48 years, was also cleared for publication. He was killed in a separate incident in southern Lebanon when a reserve paratrooper force entered a booby-trapped building in the village of Jibin, about 3.5 kilometers from the border. In that incident, 3 more soldiers were wounded. These 2 incidents point to the same reality. Even when the pace of fire drops, the battle zone remains full of explosive devices, traps, and killing infrastructure that Hezbollah left behind before the ceasefire. The IDF, for its part, continues to consolidate the security space in southern Lebanon in 3 lines. The red line is the belt of villages closest to the border, while most of the houses have already been destroyed and cleared. The yellow line lies between 6 and 10 kilometers from the border and is designed to prevent anti-tank fire and direct fire towards the communities of northern Israel. And the third line is the Litani River line, where the IDF aims to maintain control through fire and observation and to neutralize any threat to the forces. This is not only a deployment map, it is a new operational concept meant to prevent a return to the old reality in which Hezbollah could breathe freely right up against the fence. And on the ground sit the figures that the IDF released today. Since the beginning of the operation Roaring Lion, more than 1,800 Hezbollah operatives have been eliminated in Lebanon. More than 150 of them were eliminated in the last 24 hours, just before the ceasefire took into effect. And during that same day, about 300 military infrastructures were struck. This is including launchers, headquarters, and weapons depots. And amongst the dead was Hezbollah's Binchbel sector commander, Ali Raida Abbas. In other words, even in the final stage before the pause, Israel ended that phase under maximum pressure. But Hezbollah is not silent. Naim Qassem, the Secretary General of the terrorist organization, continues demanding a complete halt to the strikes, a withdrawal from southern Lebanon, the release of detainees, and return of residents, and international and also Arab-backed reconstruction. He says that the organization's men will remain in the ground with a finger on the trigger, and at the same time, other senior figures in the organization are also saying that they will not go back to what was extended before this campaign, and that they will respond to an Israeli violation, any kind of Israeli violation. In other words, even if the fire is less continuous, the will for confrontation has not disappeared. And that division, this tension, is not directed only at Israel, because according to the reports, Hezbollah continues to threaten the Lebanese leadership itself. Joseph Aoun appears to want to continue the contacts directly with Israel, even if not always in the same room. And the Shiite organization is warning that such a move could carry a price for him. There are also sharper voices inside the group that are presenting the current understandings as an insult to Lebanon. And that matters because it means that the Lebanese story is no longer only military, it's also domestic and also political. Who decides the country's future, Beirut or Dahia? And inside that tension came another incident involving UNIFIL, in which a French soldier was killed and others were wounded. In France, Hezbollah was blamed. In Lebanon, officials tried to contain this as a fallout, and the United States and the United Nations called on all sides to respect the ceasefire. This incident reminds us that the Northern Front is not only between Israel and Hezbollah. It is tied also to the international pressure. And I'm talking about France, about the peacekeeping forces, about whether Lebanon itself has the ability to enforce order on its own territory. And that's exactly why, even when Iran dominates the top headline, Lebanon continues to simmer under the surface. There's one more detail that should not be missed, and that's what's happening even further north. The authorities in Syria announced that they arrested 5 members of a terror cell linked to the Hezbollah terrorist organization. These cells have manufactured explosive devices and planned it to act against what was described as general stability. According to that report, the same cell was also linked to another group that planned an assassination in Damascus. This is not an event that is centered around Hormuz, but it does serve as a reminder of how the Iranian network and how Hezbollah continue to operate behind the scenes and cross a regional arenas, multiple zones. And now we have to return to Washington because one more figure tells the story from a different angle. The United States is beginning to delay the weapons deliveries to Europe because of the war with Iran. Countries that already paid are receiving notices of delays. In Washington, munition systems and interceptors are being redirected to the Middle East. This is not a small detail. It is a sign that the war is already assuming stockpiles at a high pace, and that it has effects that extend well beyond the Gulf. Europeans are beginning to look for alternatives. The Americans are making clear that the priority is here in the Middle East. And all this is happening while Iran understands that the United States also has costs of its own. In that same context, it's also interesting to hear about how parts of the Israeli defensive world are viewing the broader picture. Yuval Steinitz described the Israeli-American achievement against Iran as something that was determined already in the opening seconds of the campaign, with the elimination of the senior military and scientific leadership and a deep strike on the production systems. We assessed that the damage to Iran's missile production chain pushed it back by years, and stressed that the real question is not only how many missiles remain, but how long it will take to rebuild the factories, the processes, and the systems. Even if not every sentence should be taken as an official estimate, it still reflects the way that some of the systems are thinking. Not only count the launchers, but also ask what was broken in the deeper picture of Iran's stability. And still, that's exactly where the gap sits. On the one hand, there is a sense of achievement in Israel. But on the other hand, in Iran, they are celebrating victory. Masoud Pezeshkian is attacking Trump and also asking who is he to strip Iran of its rights. That's what he's asking. And Galibaf is speaking about a diplomacy of power. Tehran claims the regime survived. And also the grip of Hormuz was preserved. Iran still controls this narrow pathway of water. And even if it took a harder military blow, strategically, it was not defeated. That's the reason that the negotiations are so dangerous precisely now. Not when one side was broken, but when both sides still believe that they can get more. So this day closes with a very sharp picture. Iran is trying to turn the sea into a leverage, uranium into insurance, and the survival of the regime into proof of victory. The United States is trying to choke the money flow without immediately sliding into a broad confrontation. Israel is setting deep inside the operational coordination, but with one eye on Lebanon, one eye on Tehran, and one eye on the question of when the negotiations and the round of talks will be turning into an opening strike. Day 51 does not end in a decision, but in the sense that the campaign has sharply changed shape. Fewer massive barrages, more oil valves, more mines, more tankers, more threats, and more pressure over who will blink first. And the sharp question is no longer only whether there will be a deal, but who will make the first mistake that turns this ceasefire into yet another short pause between two rounds of war. In the meantime, the best thing that you can do is to keep spreading the truth. You can follow us, you can share, you can hit the subscribe button on this YouTube channel, and never miss another update of Boots on the Ground. We come twice a day about updates of what's happening in this region and every day of the week. Also, look for Yair Pinto and Mati Shoshani on our social media platforms to get the behind-the-scenes look. And the best thing you can do is to pray for the situation. When you pray, pray for wisdom to our leaders, pray for the IDF soldiers, the US soldier, all the intelligence personnel that need to make very, very hard decisions. and keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem. God will be in control in every situation. We can count on him. That's why I keep smiling here in Jerusalem. See you again this evening.